The video of the exchange between Candace Owens and E. Michael Jones was retweeted by him yesterday because it had been released outside from behind the paywall. And I do recommend that everybody goes and watches it. I also recently spoke to Michael Jones on Monday, and I hope you will go and watch my exchange with him. I must say I'm really so proud to have spoken to him for so many times, because I really do think he is the most witty, creative, and learned thinker of the dissident right. And I do think that actually the Jews are secretly terrified of him and would just don't dare to debate him or be seen anywhere within his neighborhood, because he is such an eloquent speaker. And over the years, I have got a bit of an idea of what motivates Dr. Jones, who is so eloquent and energetic in his political activism. I have a little theory that it's not even the Jews that he's going after, but really the Protestants. I believe that his attitude towards the Protestants is, we Catholics knew exactly what to do with the Jews until you lot came along and took over. And so you can read between the lines about what he says about the Protestants, in particular about the Anglicans and the Calvinists who were Presbyterian. And he rails against sola scriptura as if it were the worst thing in the world. But the point was, it's not that the Catholic Church even relied on the New Testament or followed any rules from it in any noticeable way. If you ask a Catholic, they would find it hard to tell you which part of the New Testament that the Catholic Church stuck to rigidly. They would make up their own rules, usually to do with sex and marriage and not being able to get a divorce, which I think was probably a reaction against the Romans divorcing each other right, left, and centre. If we can look at different successive political and religious ideologies as a reaction against a previous one, I think it will make sense. And this, of course, brings to mind the Hegelian dialectic and Marx's historical materialism. But this is how we really should understand history, through a series of oppositional interactions with one winner and being supreme briefly before some other idea came along to upset the current order. And this has been, well, it is crucial to understanding the development of Western history. Why Western history in particular? I would say it's because the West is the most powerful empire, and what it does affects the rest of the world. And in a way, we are all victims as well as beneficiaries of the global Western empire, and the crown of imperialism is currently being held by the Americans. The previous title holders were the British, and before that, it was the Spanish. See, there has been a pattern to it. First, it was Roman Catholicism, and then it was Anglicanism. The Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and now, well, it's only cultural Christianity. And that is not enough of a rule system for anyone to follow. And that neatly explains why everything is going to pot. I find myself in the ironic position of coming to the defense of the Anglican Church. And this is because the Reformation was inevitable because of the oppressiveness of Roman Catholicism. It was only a matter of time before the European monarchs, one by one, rebelled. And that was basically the reason for the wars of the Reformation. Initially, the barbarian kings of Europe were happy to accept the guidance of the Pope in Rome, but after a few generations of learning Latin and Greek, they formed an idea of what things were like and realized that the Pope was only another politician like them and was not, in fact, infallible. And so, one by one, they rebelled for different reasons. In Germany, it was economic, and in England, it was to do with the right of the king to divorce and remarry. As we all know, Henry VIII was refused an annulment by the Pope because I think it was Catherine, his wife, was a relation of the Pope's. But there were many things wrong with the Catholic Church as far as even the monarchs were concerned. So if the monarchs of Europe were finding the Catholic Church oppressive, then we can imagine how oppressive the whole thing was. So if that was inevitable, if it was only inevitable that European monarchs who used to be barbarian kings who couldn't read or write realized after a few generations of learning their own history, Latin, grammar, and Greek, that the Pope was only a mortal and fallible politician like they were, it would be inevitable that they rebelled. And this is a crucial thing to remember. And I think Catholics are quite wrong to say terrible things about the Protestants and the Anglicans. And yes, both practiced torture and both did terrible things to each other. Apparently, the reign of Bloody Mary, well, it was only 5 years, but she burnt a lot of heretics, and the Anglican oppression of Catholics lasted much longer and used many slower methods of torture and oppression, fearing Catholic conspiracies the whole time. This was inevitable because the Protestants quite rightly feared that that there would be some kind of counter-reformation as the Catholics tried to regain their lost power, until eventually in 1898, in the Spanish-American War, it was finally acknowledged that the Catholics had lost because Spain had lost a war against America in Cuba and in the Philippines. And the Anglican Church, or the Episcopalian Church, was supreme, and that was how the idea of WASP supremacy came about. And so the West liberalized. And E. Michael Jones said it should go back to what it was. But how can he, an American, want to restore the monarchy? He did say it was a terrible thing for the English to kill their king in the time of Oliver Cromwell, and I'm sure he would say the same thing about the French killing Louis XVI and the Russians killing Nicholas II with the rest of his family. But again, we must accept this as inevitable. It was only a matter of time before Christianity failed. And it failed because there were no rules. And therefore, no one followed the non-existent rules. And even as E. Michael Jones talked about sola scriptura, it's not the case that individuals could just read the Bible and interpret it any way they wanted, because of course they were, well, if they weren't the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury, they would have no authority to make any statements on behalf of either church. And in the end, when the authority of the Pope waned to an unacceptable degree, the doctrine of papal infallibility was created in 1870, which was presumably something to do with German unification and the Prussians reorganizing the German state according to the preferences of the Prussian state in opposition to the Catholic Church. And this was what led to the Kulturkampf, which was very painful for the Germans because they didn't know quite what was going on. They were torn between loyalty to their church and the power of the now dominant Prussian state. But eventually they settled down into Lutheranism. But this did not, in the end, preserve the European monarchs from the European absolute monarchs from extinction, as we know from history. For it was in 1918 when Christendom ended, when the German and Austrian and Russian emperors were extinguished. The German emperor and the Austrian emperor abdicated and did not lose their lives, but Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, was exterminated with the rest of his family. So, going a bit further to Franco Spain, we also know that the Spanish monarchy also wobbled. Franco, when the lifetime dictator of Spain, did actually return power to the Spanish king, which was, well, I think that was jolly nice of him. He could have, did he have any sons? But the thing is, I guess he hadn't evolved a system of passing on the succession of his leadership position as dictator of Spain. So I guess he didn't know what to do. He didn't know who to appoint, and he thought he'd just hand the ball back to the Spanish monarch. And so the Spanish monarchy limps on for a little bit, along with the Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish monarchies. I think there are, oh yes, there's Monaco, and maybe a few others I can't immediately remember, but they are Well, minor principalities and or constitutional monarchs. Yes, of course. How could I forget the Dutch? So I think it would be more sensible if we accept that the end of absolute monarchy was a historical inevitability. And this is part of Whig history that infuriates E. Michael Jones so much. He keeps telling us that the Whig interpretation of history is wrong. But perhaps it can be said to apply to the three Abrahamic religions, in that Judaism, with its 36 capital offences, is really quite oppressive. Christianity was also oppressive, since blasphemy was a capital offence, and along comes Islam with its support of the First Amendment. So we can see that there has been a progressive move towards increased liberty, even for people who believe in God. But the liberty that has come about because of the French Revolution is now approaching levels of extremism, and it needs to be rolled back by something more than a lifetime dictatorship of somebody like Francisco Franco. And I'm suggesting a constitutional republic. Now, the monarchies of Europe would find themselves possibly a little alarmed at this prospect, but there is no fear, no threat of regicide, since they're not really responsible for anything, being constitutional monarchies who are in fact just figureheads. So they can, quite easily retire into private life if that is what they wish, or they could write their memoirs, or, But the important thing really is that to understand that God, if he exists, does not support absolute monarchy. We know from the history of the Jews that they had terrible kings, and we also know from the history of Christendom that they had terrible kings too. They were so terrible that they got themselves killed. E. Michael Jones also said that the killing of a king was satanic. I suppose he was saying that the French revolutionaries were satanic, but this leaves the question of being of what we are to do if we have a terrible king. What are we supposed to do with them if we, can't vote them out of office, and they won't let go of power? It would mean civil war, and this was exactly what happened in England when Cromwell won the English Civil War and had Charles I beheaded. Is there anything inherently holy about being monarch? I would say not, because there is nothing in either the Bible or the Quran that says kings must never be removed. And in fact, to go back to a very ancient empire, China has the ancient idea of the mandate of heaven, and the mandate of heaven states that every Chinese emperor begins his reign with the mandate of heaven. This is a presumption, and this means that it can only be withdrawn by signs of it being withdrawn, such as famine, pestilence, natural disaster, revolution, and invasion. And when you have too many of these things happening at once, it can be presumed that you no longer retain the mandate of heaven and you have to go. So back to the point E. Michael Jones was making. He blamed the Protestants. And I've just explained to you why I think it's unfair, because the Reformation was a historical inevitability, because you would expect that once barbarian, illiterate kings started learning how to read and write and learning about their own history and reading the Bible and learning Latin and Greek, they began to understand better how power is imposed and created by the structure of the Catholic Church, which actually is the Roman Empire living on, speaking to us through one of its institutions. So, we have decided that the Reformation was a historical inevitability, and that the Protestants would win, because eventually most of the kings of Europe would realize that there was no point being bossed around by the Pope. They could easily be their own Pope and interpret the Bible in their own way. And who's to stop them? No one. Thirdly, the Protestants would try to do things a little differently. So the Protestant work ethic was a way for the Protestants to show their moral superiority to the Catholics, who might have been a lazy bunch, I don't know, but the whole point of the Protestant work ethic was to show themselves, because they were, I guess, the new kid on the block. They were keener and more anxious to make a mark for themselves. But sadly, all that has gone because of the welfare state. The Protestant work ethic has been utterly extinguished, and this was because the Anglo-Americans decided, after they had acquired control of the sea lanes, to ban slavery. I wonder if this has anything to do with starving the Spanish colonies of slave labor, which of course impoverished the Spanish Empire and eventually ended it. But anyway, this was what happened in the West, vis-a-vis the Catholics and the Protestants. And now the Protestants have also lost their mojo with their welfare state after abolishing slavery, because slavery is an institution. It has its social uses. It allows people with no money to pledge their labor in order to acquire valuable things, such as a passage across the Atlantic to find a new life, and make their fortune. So obviously crossing the Atlantic was a very valuable thing for many successful Americans now. In fact, I would say that what made America great was slavery. And it didn't apply only to black people, but also to any white European who had to sell himself into indentured servitude in order to pay for his passage across the Atlantic. So if people take a slightly different view of slavery, which is currently the one of a black picking cotton and being whipped to death over nothing at all, we have to understand that slavery is a universal institution that people of all races practice. In fact, the whole point of war was to acquire territory and take slaves. And this was how the ancient Greeks regarded it. So I think E. Michael Jones is perhaps being unfair on the Protestants who are now in a state of imperial decline. There was discussion about controlling the sin of lust, which really ended with the lack of Hollywood censorship on films that introduced gratuitous sex scenes to sell their movies. You have to wonder why the Americans did not have stricter censorship laws. But in his conversation with Candace Owens, he did say that the Catholics did once successfully get some films censored, some movies censored, but when another movie that came along, it's not. It seems the Catholics had lost their will for film censorship, and then there was this waterfall of movies with gratuitous sex scenes and eventually free porn for all of us. He talked about the Marquis de Sade, who said, "The moral man is at rest, but the immoral man is in a perpetual state of unrest." As some of you may know, the Marquis de Sade was a pornographer, and I think it was mentioned that he wrote a number of pornographic scenarios with Marie Antoinette in various sexual scenarios, and obviously the French revolutionaries were not monarchists. He also, interestingly, mentioned psychologists. So he talked about Wilhelm Reich and Jung as well as Freud, and decided they were all bad. But it brought home the point that the psychologist now, the therapist now, is the 21st century version of going to confession. And it is one of E. Michael Jones's theories that not being able to go to confession, which Protestants didn't do, has caused all kinds of neurosis in them that psychologists such as Freud and Jung and Wilhelm Reich have exploited. But then I thought, what about Muslims? Are they neurotic? I suppose they must be in their own way. Actually, I'm pretty sure they are neurotic, but they do not go on about not being able to go to confession. In fact, they think there's something a bit icky about it, because they are against the idea, and Jews too, they are against the idea of going to someone, going to the priest, saying that you did this terrible thing, and then the priest giving you absolution, and you didn't even, say sorry to the person that you wronged. And basically the priest actually has no business to forgive you on behalf of anyone else. If anybody's going to forgive you, it would be God. And Jews and Muslims have a very prescribed method of demonstrating penitence, which is it's actually a four-stage process. You have to cease what you're doing. You have to confess your sin, and then you have to say you'll never do it again, and then you have to make amends. So there are four stages, and this is what righteous Muslims and Jews are supposed to do. So it's not just a matter of them, going to their rabbi or their imam and saying, I stole something from someone, and I want you to forgive me on behalf of the person I stole from. So this is a more practical and fairer way of dealing with feelings of guilt. E. Michael Jones also mentions Nietzsche writing about the Oedipus complex in the birth of tragedy. I knew I had a point about it. Oh yes, so the tragedy of Oedipus was he didn't know who he was. Because he was an orphan and he was brought up by a shepherd, I think, and then because he was such a fine young man, he in time became successful, and without realizing it, he killed his father in a road rage incident and went on to meet the queen, and who found him attractive, and they married each other, and it turned out that she was his mother, and in his horror at the event, he pulled out his own eyes. But the story of Oedipus is really why it's so important for everyone to know who their parents are. We won't know who we are if we don't know who our parents are, and if we don't know who our parents are, we could be, or who our siblings are, we could be inadvertently having sex with them, right? And so it is important for people to marry before they have sex, and also for parents to stay together after they are married, to bring up the children, and obviously they have to live amongst people who know them in order to confirm their identity. We are more ourselves if there are people all around us who know us and interact us on the basis of our position in their group. They also go on to talk about anti-Semitism and saying it's undefined and everybody's being accused of that. And I would define, do we need to define anti-Semites? I mean, I suppose it's important if, well, yes, it is important if you're being accused of it and you're cancelled as a result, and then, you have to say, well, how am I an anti-Semite? am I an anti-Semite just because I have friends who express anti-Semitic views? Doesn't everyone have anti-Semitic views these days? Isn't anti-Semitism being cooked up even by the powers that be as an excuse to censor us later for expressing this kind of opinion? And aren't they, in fact, deliberately provoking it by saying we can't do this thing? You know, I mean, what happens if? Let me start again. The powers that be are using reverse psychology on us by telling us that we cannot ever offend the feelings of Jews. They know they are making us want to do it all the more. And by provoking us into making anti-Semitic comments, they will then say, look at all these anti-Semites, we must do something about them. We must censor their speech, and thereby promote even more anti-Semitism and even more excuses for them to censor our speech. And this, I think, is the nature of the psyop, and it is being deliberately done by the powers that be. And I think the Jews are just the recipients of this privilege of having their feelings protected. But really, it's not done for out of kindness to them. It is actually deliberate. Dennis Prager was discussed. Dennis Prager is reform. He's a reform Jew, and he once said the terrible thing of watching porn is okay because if a man masturbates, if a husband masturbates to porn, it is better than him having an affair with another woman, which is actually logical and fair enough. But of course, what Dennis Prager could have said was that porn should be banned and brothels legalized in red light districts, licensed in red light districts. So I think that would solve the problem of so many women having sex with random men. I know people are going to accuse me of encouraging casual sex, but I don't think so. I don't think so because men, on the whole, prefer to think they can wangle it out of women for free by, telling them lies and making themselves act in a way that a woman might find attractive. But the point is, this only works in a culture of casual sex. But if you said, yes, you can have sex, even if you're not married, but only in a certain place, only in a certain part of town, and only in licensed brothels, then the men who want to have sex for that reason alone, without necessarily wanting a long-term relationship, know where they can go, leaving women mostly virgins who would still be marriageable. So the culture of casual sex confuses both men and women because women think they have to put out in order to stand any chance of having a long-term relationship. So they do. And men who know that this is how women think might think they can get away indefinitely with having sex with women and never ever committing. And this leads women to be angry and disappointed with men because they're not married mothers and cause all kinds of problems for them later in women hating men and then men hating women, and this has got to stop. And for this reason, I think licensing brothels in red light districts would have the effect of making women concentrate their minds. Because if you were to ask a virgin whether she'd like to be a prostitute or a married mother, most well brought up young women would say, I would like to be a married mother. And those who hate the thought of marriage might hum and ha, but they will not, I think, be saying they prefer to be a prostitute. So this would raise the price of sex, but regulate it in that men would not necessarily be deprived of sex. But the whole point of this process is to make sure that no woman gives any man sex for free, because that is very corrupting of their morals and must be avoided, prevented at all costs. They go on to discuss the infantilization of men through Taylor Swift, apparently. I don't quite know that, but it is obvious that many men have been infantilized, and that is why they are so despised by their own women, who keep voting for foreign men to come and replace the men of their race. I see there are a few people now. I will read your comments. I didn't know about Lawrence Southern being raped by Andrew Tate. Did he really? You're making it up? The thing is, I mean, Lauren Southern is damaged goods, isn't she? She's always ratting on people. Maybe that's how she thinks she's going to earn a crust. But I'm afraid that the too many women who've complained of rape, and too many men accused of rape. The whole thing is now, degraded into, I don't know. It's no longer even a big deal anymore. We are so morally depraved that even these sexual offences don't really make much of an impression anymore. I mean, look at the Epstein so-called invitation list. I didn't know that AA was wearing Tate's beige suit, black t-shirt and cigars. Because I don't look at him. Slavery is America's curse. It was unnecessary and it sowed the seeds of America's destruction. Joe says, well, I would repeat that that my conviction is that slavery is an institution like marriage and prostitution, and you shouldn't criminalize institutions, but instead regulate them so that the parties to these transactions have their rights protected. So I do think that to solve their problem of, well, America does have a labor problem, and they do have these welfare claimants who are much resented, and why should anybody pay you to stay at home when you could be made to work for your benefits? And the best way of making anyone work for their benefits is to turn them into slaves, so that they are under the supervision of the person using their services and not sitting at home to be checked up on. And sadly, I think it would have to be the case that slavery will be seen as a career opportunity when things go really badly. I don't know what you mean, Caravaggio. It means whatever they want it to mean. You mean anti-Semitism? Um, I was actually going to say that anti-Semitism should not be a crime anyway, and anyone can express dislike of for any other group of people as long as it's not defamation, if it's not inciting violence on them. I think you can say whatever you like about groups of people and why you dislike them, and there shouldn't be a problem. But I know um, this privileging of Jews is linked to the Anglo-American imperial project on Zionism. It is actually Zionism that is sacred to the American empire, and it is really to prevent anyone from saying, I don't want American I don't want America to unwaveringly support Israel in whatever it does, because it is crucial to the American empire, its presence in the Middle East, in Israel. What's your take on the 24,000 Afghans being covertly imported into Britain? Well, I guess, if it's not Afghans, it's somebody else, right? It is really, well, I guess they were ordered by somebody. There's work to be done, and we sort of know that because of these migrant hotels. I'm sure they've gone through the proper government channels to, be there to have migrants come to, be parceled out to whoever hired them. I mean, they're not refugee centres. I mean, that's a thing. They were specially ordered. So there is a labour shortage, but I know the people who hate immigration will deny that there is a labour shortage. I do talk to these people, and obviously it would suit them to think, oh, there's no labour shortage at all. It's the Jews importing them. There's no dogma of superiority. I am not really sure what rake means. I think, I mean, as I've said earlier, I think it's a use of reverse psychology to actually provoke people into saying anti-Semitic things and then prosecute them for it, and make more people hate Jews, and use it as an excuse for even more censorship. Um, that's what I think. You don't have to blame Jews for it. What's my opinion on AA? Well, he gets all the invitations to speak when it should be me, because I'm proposing something viable, I would say, and radical. And AA does nothing more than say he hopes that his daughter AAA will produce grandchildren who will overthrow the matriarchy. How can that be good enough? Because he isn't proposing anything concrete, he is allowed to operate, while I am not. So I come back to, is regicide necessarily satanic? And I know I was talking about monarchy and how Jews had terrible kings and so did Christians. And I would have gone on to discuss whether God approves of monarchy, and there's actually no sign that he does. We know from the book of Samuel that God was displeased at being asked for a king. And if you read between the lines, I think God was saying, my law's not good enough for you, that you want a king who will tax you and send you on his imperial wars. Is that what you really want? He said threateningly. And the silly old Jew said, yes, that's what we want, give it to us. And he did. And the rest is history. Oh, yes. And then E. Michael Jones goes on about Milton's Paradise Lost. And this is actually quite important because he talks about, this is just Milton, right? It's just Milton. It's not the Bible. Because in the Bible, in the book of Job, God and Satan have better relations with each other. They're just sort of talking like a master and his servant. And we know from the book of Job that it starts with Job rich, prosperous, with many children, thanking God for his good fortune, and God saying, isn't it nice to be thanked for things? And Satan said, well, I don't think he'd be thanking you if he didn't get what he wants. And so I guess God said, want a bet? And the bet was on. And Job, even with his trials and his annoying wife who told him to curse God and die, Job did not curse God. And even though he had also annoying friends who said, well, you must have done something wrong if you're suffering in this terrible way. But what I wanted to emphasize was that God and Satan were kind of working in cahoots with each other, and not in the sense of John Milton's Satan, who was angry at being sent to hell after being cast out of heaven by God, or whatever the story was. And then Satan said, it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Now, I don't think the Bible mentions any of this. This is just the imagination of John Milton. And but anyway, since Milton was Protestant, he was going to blame Protestants for this Satanism, which I think is rather unfair. Muslims, I know, define Satan as rebellion from God. Are Catholics not also similarly rebellious in worshipping a man after knowing full well that God forbade idolatry and blasphemy in his commandments? And the answer must be, if you're Trinitarian, you are being satanic. So, just put your hands up to it and say you're sorry. Say you're going to stop, you have to stop, and then you have to say you'll never do it again, and then how does it go? Anyway, the 4 stages. You stop, you say you'll never do it again, you say you're sorry, and then you make amends. I believe that those are the four-stage process of showing you're really sorry. Got any better ideas, people? Anyone listening? All right. The hour is up, and I think I have made all my points. So thank you all for coming. I hope it made some sense. Even those of you who are atheists and not particularly interested in theology or Catholicism or the wars of the Reformation, I hope it made some sense, and I thank you all.